Hi everyone. Good morning from Brisbane. We are coming to you with some breaking news. Migration Queensland has finally opened their program for 2023-24 financial year for their skill migration and small business owner pathway, subclass 190, subclass 491, regional provisional visa and small business owner subclass 491 regional provisional visa pathways are open as of yesterday, which is the 6th of September. I will, in this video, I will quickly go through and explain to you that what are the requirements for each of these criteria, because Queensland has come up with few different pathways for different visa subclasses and for different types of people who are interested in Queensland state nomination. The nominations are open for onshore and offshore applicants both, but they have come up with a different Queensland skill occupation list for offshore applicants who are interested in applying to Queensland who are currently not living in Queensland and living in a different country. I will quickly now go to their Migration Queensland website. This time they have come up with a really organized and more structured ways to inform the applicants their eligibility requirement, which I really like, which really helps. So the different pathways currently available for Queensland 190 and 491 are graduates of Queensland University, which means if you studied 2 years at least in Queensland and you graduated from Queensland at least in the last 2 years. So you are considered as a Queensland graduate, but there are different eligibility criteria for different graduates of a bachelor's, master's, STEM qualification or PhD. So I will in a bit go through each and every pathway and explain the general criteria as well as the specific criteria for the specific pathway. The second one is skilled workers living in Queensland. So if you're a skilled worker, which means you have an occupation and you're currently working in this occupation, that's of the legislative instrument, which is the medium list, short-term list and ROL. And if you're currently working, then you're considered a skilled worker living in Queensland. Again, there's so many criteria for this subclass 190 and subclass 491. They have minimum points and they have minimum work experience and some caveats for occupations. So it's really important to understand the eligibility criteria. So I will go through that in a bit as well. The next one is the skilled workers living offshore. So this is the offshore skilled migration program for people who are not living in Queensland, living in a different country, if you're interested. Again, the criteria is very clear and very specific based on the occupation. The work experience is specific based on your occupation. So again, very important to understand, because one of the main criteria, they say, please make sure that you meet all the eligibility criteria at the time of lodging your EOI, because you're going to get invited and you're going to be asked for the proof of documentation. The last one is the small business, small business owners operating in regional Queensland. So I'm going to go through each and every one, explain to you the different criteria. Now let's look at graduates of a Queensland University. So there's common criteria and also there's specific criteria for each and every pathway. So I will first go through the pathways. Mario, it's not scrolling. Right, so the general eligibility criteria for graduates of a Queensland University is, and this pathway is for high performing graduates who've graduated from a Queensland University and they're currently onshore in Queensland. So you can't be in any other states. If you graduated and moved to a different state, in your graduate visa or the post-study work visa, you are not eligible for this stream. The basic eligibility is you need to have at least 75 points or higher for subclass 190. And keep in mind, this 75 points is including the state points. So 70 on your own, 5 points from the state, and you're eligible. And you need to have at least 65 points or higher for subclass 491. This is the regional point. So 60 on your own, 50 points on your own, 15 points from the state, then you're eligible for subclass 491. And you need to have competent English, which is IELTS equivalent 6 in each band, or PTE 15 each band. You need to be living in Queensland with an occupation that's on the legislative instrument, which is pretty much all the medium to long term and short term occupation list. And if you're living in regional Queensland, again, you need to have an occupation from that regional occupation list. And you need to have completed 100% of your studies in Queensland. So that's again very important thing to understand. If you were in a different state and you move to Queensland, you may not be eligible for this pathway. You need to have completed 100% of your studies in Queensland. And you need to have graduated in the last 2 years. That's again a very important note that you have to understand. Right, let's look at the other criteria. So they have again broken this down depending on what you studied. There are specific criteria. So if you studied a PhD, then one of the benefits is you don't need to have a job offer, or you don't need to be working, and you need to have had a positive decision on your thesis. So that's the only extra criteria for PhD. I think PhD graduates are most benefited from this graduate pathway for Queensland, because their criteria is quite lenient. The second one is master's graduate in a STEM or agriculture field. So as you can see, they are giving priority to agriculture field candidates as well. So you have to be employed full-time, at least 30 hours per week in a nominated occupation. So which is your occupation in skill level 1 occupation, which means that occupation needs a bachelor's degree. And the second one is master's graduate that's not in a STEM field. So these graduates who are not in a STEM field, there is a bit of a strict criteria. For subclass 190, you need to have at least 6 GPA. GPA is grade average point. So everybody who completes their studies in Australia, they get a GPA, which is average of all the results throughout their studies. And then you divide that by the subjects and you get your GPA. So you need to have at least 6 GPA if you want to go through Queensland Graduate 190. If you want to go through Queensland Graduate 491, then your GPA requirement is 5. And again, for these graduates, they need to be employed full-time, minimum 30 hours a week in their nominated skilled occupation. Now the bachelor's graduate. Again, they have the same requirement, 6 GPA or above for 190, 5 GPA or above for 491. Again, they need to be working full-time, 30 hours in their nominated occupation. And there are some caveats applied to these Queensland graduates as well. So these caveats are only applicable to accountants. So if you're an accountant general, so if your nominated occupation is accountant general, then you need to be working in an accounting firm or a medium to large scale business. So the medium to large size business is defined as you need to have at least 20 employees in the business. Unless you're employed in an accounting firm or a medium to large scale business for general accountants, you're not eligible to apply for Queensland Graduate Pathway. And for internal and external auditors, you must have a job as an auditor, not as an accountant. That's again important caveat. And the last one for cooks and chefs. So cooks and chefs, they cannot be employed in fast food or takeaway restaurants. They have to be a proper dining restaurant if you want to be invited in Queensland as a cook or a chef. Now I will go through, move on to the skilled workers living in regional. Again, there are some similarities of the Queensland Graduate Pathway, but some are different for skilled workers living and working in Queensland. So the eligibility criteria for this you need to first meet the Home Affairs criteria, which you need to have 65 points, including the state nomination, have a positive skill assessment, or you need to be, under 45 years. So you need to meet the basic eligibility requirements of the Home Affairs, and also there are different criteria for Queensland. Now I will go through the Queensland criteria for subclass 190 if you're a skilled graduate living and working in Queensland. So if you are applying for subclass 190, you need to have minimum 75 points, including the state point. And you need to have occupation on the eligible list of occupations. And you need to have at least competent English or higher if that's required for your skill assessment. For example, for accountants, they need to get 7 in each band for their skill assessment. For registered nurse or any nurse, you need to have 7 in each band. And some other occupations, you need to have higher English score in order to get your skill assessment. So you need that English or competent English is enough. Right, so the work experience requirement. So this is the requirement most of the applicants are anxiously waiting to know. You must have evidence that you've been living in Queensland and undertaking full-time post-qualification employment, minimum 30 hours per week, in your nominated or closely related occupation for the 3 months immediately before EOI lodgement. You must still be employed in your nominated or closely related occupation when your EOI is assessed, which means after qualification, you need to be working for at least 3 months, full-time basis in Queensland. Can't be a virtual office, the office has to be in Queensland if you want to get invited for subclass 190. So 3 months full-time. And then you need to have evidence of ongoing employment as well for further 12 months. So right now, 3 months working and 12 months contract for subclass 190. And then you must commit to living in Queensland for at least 2 years. Now let's look at the 491 requirement for skilled workers in Queensland. You must have at least 65 points or higher, including the state points. You must have an occupation from that list, and you must have competent English or higher, except for occupations where a higher skill is required. So as I said, so some occupations you need to have high English for skill assessment, then obviously they need high English. And so for 190, you need to be working for 3 months with a 12 months contract. For subclass 491, you need to be living and working in regional Queensland and have a full-time post-qualification employment of 30 hours or more in your nominated or closely related occupation at the time you lodge your EOI. You must still be employed in your nominated occupation. So that 3 month requirement is not there for subclass 190. So even if you're working for 1 month or a couple of months or a couple of weeks, you're still eligible to lodge 491. That's actually pretty good news, because last year it was working for 3 months. And then you have to provide evidence of ongoing employment for at least the next 6 months. Then again, you have to be committed to living and working in regional for at least 3 years from the visa grant. So there are some caveats for this. Again, for accountants, you have to be working in an accounting firm or a large scale business, which is 20 employees. There is another additional requirement for accountant general. You must be a CPA, CA or IPA, or are studying towards becoming a CPA, CA or IPA. That's again an interesting criteria, but it is there. And internal and external auditors, you must again have a job as an auditor, not as an accountant. And cooks and chef, no takeaway or fast food business. It has to be a proper dining restaurant. So that is the requirement for skilled workers in Queensland. Now let's quickly look at the offshore requirement. So for offshore, they have given us a list of occupations which we have looked at. There are some really good occupations in there, but for each occupation, it is worth having a look, because for each occupations, you need to have certain amount of work experience. For some occupations, they're saying you need to have 5 years. For engineering manager, for example, they're saying you need to have 5 years. But for other occupations, they're saying you need to only have 3 years, or for some occupations, 4 years. So it is important to go and have a look at this list to make sure that you complete all the, you are eligible based on the Queensland requirement as well as the Home Affairs requirement. Now I will quickly go through the offshore requirement for both 190 and 491 for Queensland. So the points, you need to, for 190, again you need to have 75 points including state points, or 65 points for 491. This is for offshore applicants. But if you're an offshore applicant for a trade occupation, you can have 65 points and still be eligible for subclass 190. And you need to have an occupation in the QSOL, Queensland Skill Occupation List, for 190 and 491 both. And you need to have competent English or higher if your occupation requires high English. Work experience again is based on the QSOL. I will go through this list in a while so you can get an idea. And you must be dedicated to living in Queensland for 2 years if you're going through 190, or 3 years if you're going through the 491 once your visa is granted. I'm just going to quickly open the QSOL list, and I can go through and read out some of the occupations. And in this list, if you look at the occupations, some occupations are not eligible for 190. They are only offered to 491 applicants. For example, farmers, most of the farmers are only eligible for subclass 491, and they need to have at least 3 years work experience. Construction project manager, for example, needs 5 years work experience, so as the engineering manager and production manager. So most of these managerial occupations in construction, they need at least 5 years. But I can see many engineers in there, from geotechnical, quantity survey, structural, transport, electrical, electronics, industrial, mechanical, production engineers, petroleum engineers, aerotechnical engineers, agricultural engineers. They all need 4 years work experience, but these occupations are on the list. As you can see from this, they've given priority, or they've opened up for health and construction sectors, because I can see most of the nurses are there, medical specialists are there, and also the IT sector, a lot of software engineers, computer network systems engineers, and many IT occupations are there. So this is for offshore. If you have an occupation from the list, then you are eligible if you meet all the criteria that I explained earlier. And I will now go through the final, but small business owners operating in regional. So Queensland is one of the first states to have this small business owners pathway open. And now they have pathway 1 and 2 for small business owners. For pathway 1, you have to buy an existing business for at least 100,000, and you have to be an Australian resident, and you have to employ at least one Australian resident. The business must be pre-existing business which has been purchased and trading for minimum 6 months before you get an invitation. And now there is pathway 2, which is to be eligible for this pathway, you must have started your own business and continuously run that business for minimum of 2 years. So pathway 1, you pay 100,000 minimum, buy the business, run it for 6 months. But pathway 2, you can open up your own business, but you must run it for at least 2 years, and the business must be generating profits and have a turnover of at least $200,000 in the last 12 months prior to applying. And again, for this pathway, you will be making investments in Queensland, so you have to understand there are risks involved for this investment. So it's best that you get some advice before you get into Queensland small business pathway to understand your responsibilities of investment as well. Right, so these are the eligibility criteria for all the requirements for Queensland. Now I will go through the application process quickly. So first you need to make sure that you meet all the eligibility criteria of DHA as well as the Queensland. Once you know that you meet the eligibility criteria and you have all the documentation in hand, you have to lodge expression of interest. If you meet the eligibility criteria, Queensland have said that they will assess each and every EOI, and if you're eligible, they will give you an invitation. At that point, they will ask you to submit an application to get the final invitation from Queensland. And they will ask you to submit documentation to prove your work, prove your living in Queensland, and prove that you've been working and you have continuous work. So there will be some documentary evidence that you need to prove, like utility bills or statutory declaration for your living and pay slips and employment contract and employment reference letters for your work. So you need to have this in hand if you at the time of applying to Queensland. And once you're successful in your second round, you will get a proper invitation from Queensland government as well as the DHA asking you to lodge your visa application, and you will have 60 days to do so. So I hope now you have a better understanding about the Queensland criteria. They are open for onshore and offshore applicants through their subclass 190 and subclass 491 regional provisional work visa. It's very important that you understand this criteria and how it applies to you as an applicant to check your eligibility before submitting your expression of interest. So thank you so much for listening in, and we are planning of properly breaking it down again, having a proper video as well, so explaining all the criteria one more time if this is not clear enough. So if you're interested in lodging an expression of interest to Queensland, please get in touch with us. Our contact information is displayed on the screen. It's admin@sirus.com.au, or you can WhatsApp us +61 450 674 787, or you can call us 1300 074 787. Looking forward to helping you get lodging your nomination for Queensland State. Thank you so much. Stay safe.